Well, I haven't put out a video on YouTube in a little while, and so I wanted to kind of talk about something new I'm doing, and but I think this is an important idea, just generally speaking, and that is, how do you define your movement practice in terms of the overall scope of your life, right? Whether you're a yogi or like myself, I practice Feldenkrais Method, maybe you were a runner. And this might seem overly simplistic, but what I'd suggest is that you do this practice to make your life better, right? And so if you're a yogi, it's not just what you do in the yoga classroom. If it's a runner, it's not just about while you're running, right, et cetera, et cetera. What I have become interested in for myself is kind of a redefinition of what I might call my own personal practice, but my suggestion is this might be interesting for you to think about, whatever your particular practice may be and whatever your relationship to it is now, which is to consider that your practice is a piece of how you show up in relationship to the other people in your life, to the world, right? In other words, if you have a practice, let's use, for example, meditation, which you can meet in groups and meditate with others, and it's that would be a more relational meditation practice, right? To do that, even though what's happening inside your head when you're closing your eyes and focusing on your breath and following a process there, that might seem to be something you're doing on your own. But if you're in a room of 5 people or 10 people doing this together, there's a relational aspect, because of the space that you're sharing, because maybe you have some dialogue before and after meditating. But you could be, of course, in your home meditating by yourself, right? And maybe with a timer, the timer goes off, you're done, and you go on with your day. But what I would submit is that time you put aside to meditate, it's a piece of how you show up in your next interaction with another person, right? So one of these versions, meditating in a group, might seem to be more explicitly relational, but I'm making the case here that to practice on your own with the right kind of framing of what you're doing, you could also think of that relationally. What's become interesting for me is to become a little more intentional about the idea that my practice is a relational practice. As part of that, I've been more engaged recently in explicitly relational practices, and most prominent for me is circling, but this is also connected to the practice of Diaologos. And so you might not have heard of either of these terms, so I'm going to paint just a very brief picture of what each of those two things are. There are deep practices, and a lot can be said, and you can also use your search engine to look up the Circling Institute, or you can look up the work of John Vervaeke, who, at least in my experience, is the most prominent exponent of this idea of Diaologos. But both of these two forms of practice are essentially conversational practices. In circling, a group of people will be in a circle speaking. One person will be, so to speak, placed in the center of the circle, and they will be at the center of attention, and then there is probably a lead circler or a facilitator who is speaking to them and helping to draw out their experience. And then the other people in the circle are present with the intention to be be further resourceful for the person in the center of the circle. Everyone is having an experience together, but unlike getting together with your friends over some drinks in the restaurant, there's a specific container of vulnerability, of intention to become more deeply connected in the exchange. And when this is done formally, there's an agreement about confidentiality, so that if someone explains something very personal to themselves, they can feel safe to do so, that their story won't be repeated elsewhere. But the point is that it's a conversation wherein everyone is explicitly looking to connect what they are feeling in each moment and to speak to that, to say things that are the kinds of things that we might often think but not say in other contexts. And so this allows a dynamic to unfold, which is obviously relational because it's between the people in the conversation, but to be explicit that the people in the conversation are there to mirror each other. And to be in a conversation like that is to have the opportunity to learn something that you might not be able to learn on your own. So more could be said, but if I now move to speaking about Diaologos, just to try to not make things too complex, I could just say that I think the basic intention of relation is the same as in circling. There's an intention for everyone to really hear what the other one is saying, and to help draw out the ideas of the other speaker and to speak oneself from the place of what one is feeling. So in both circling and in Diaologos, the body, the corporeal body, the felt sensations that happen in the body, those are explicitly part of the conversation. It's not just an exchange of words. So one might refer to, when you said that, I felt this in my chest, or something happened to my breathing, and that becomes part of the conversation. But in Diaologos, while there might be moments of personal sharing, the topic of conversation, generally speaking, is the virtues. In other words, like honesty or wisdom or courage. They're these sort of universal themes of human experience, which you might say can never be ultimately pinned down, because to be honest in one situation is different from being honest in another. Or as Vervaeke likes to say, using the example of kindness, the way I'm kind to my friend is different than how I'm kind to my partner, and that's different than how I'm kind to my child. So all of these different kind of elements of what we all experience very viscerally moving through our life, yet we share to some degree in common as humans with each other. It provides a fertile ground for us to have a conversation that is exploratory in nature. It's not about winning the argument. It's not about being so attached to one's ideas that one is expressing that the purpose is to kind of win with one's ideas. It doesn't mean that one doesn't express indeed what they think is true, but the idea is to offer your ideas into the circle of the conversation in such a way that they might be changed by the listener and by the other speakers in reflecting back. But my speaking and sharing what it is that I think internally and opening myself to the possibility that what I originally thought might not look the same by the end of this conversation, if I see that as an opportunity, then I speak, I speak in the sense that I can speak when I feel that my listeners are there to be charitable to me. And that is in the same way that there are agreements in circling. This is essentially the kind of intention that speakers bring into Diaologos. So I'll just end by saying that what I am personally doing in this moment is I am offering a weekly class where, as I have done for many years, I'm offering awareness through movement processes from the Feldenkrais Method. So movement explorations that allow the participants to make, you could say, somatic discoveries about themselves. But rather than what often happens, if we go back to where I began, this idea of a practice could be more of a solo practice or a relational practice. What can happen in a Feldenkrais class, just like a yoga class or any other group movement class, so-called group movement class, if you think of it that way, if you frame it that way, it's very easy to show up, to find your space in the room, to digest the instructions or the demonstration that the teacher offers, to do your thing in your space, and then, you know, maybe have some pleasantry exchanged with other students, but essentially to have your own experience and then to leave. Or these days, maybe the whole thing is happening in a Zoom room online, but it's your experience, although you are in a group gathering, there's an event where people are together. There's not a specific invitation for a coming together. So in my weekly class, which is called Expanding Your World Through Embodied Dialogue, there is this last piece, the embodied dialogue part. So the class involves an awareness through movement lesson, but what we also do in each class is we take a short excerpt. I've just made a number of selections from some authors and thinkers that I think have valuable ideas to offer in this realm of relationship and understanding how we relate to ourselves and each other and the world. And so I bring those words into the class, we read them together, we have some exchange, then we go into movement, and the movement that I offer is always, I have the intention to make a somatic connection to what was expressed in words, that we begin the discussion of before we move, and then after we move, we return to the discussion a second time. The hope being that we're in a new bodily experience, and that we can bring that into the conversation to enrich and renew the conversation and take it further along. And I'll just say I'm doing this as I go along. One of the things that I've become very aware of in the first couple of classes is how, by calling together the class, by preparing an awareness through movement lesson, by bringing in a series of words, I've done quite a lot to compose an experience. So I do that with the intention to offer something valuable, and yet in the spirit of relational practice, what I see happening as this class continues is to open up the space to have others bring in maybe a passage from some book that they read, some person that they think, or even something that they themselves have written. There's someone involved in the current class who is a philosopher and a metaphysician and a writer, and I've invited her to bring in something to an upcoming class. So in any case, the point is that we come together for a kind of a community movement practice, and I'm offering awareness through movement as the way of doing that for us, and then we're also speaking and relating together. And my hope is just that this will develop. It's new, but it's been exciting so far. There's been 2 class meetings, and the class continues every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're interested, you'd like to join, you can join a single class, you can drop in, or you can sign up for an entire month of classes, and that's going to be on the calendar. So I'm making this video in August, and we've already had a class, but you can still join for all of August. You'll get the recordings of the classes you've missed, and then there'll be another sign up when we get to September, so on. And there's a new theme each month. So for the first month, our theme has been connecting insides and outsides. So you might think of the inside of your body and the outside world, but maybe there's other ways of conceiving of inside and outside. In any case, there's something related to our experience in a relationship that has an internal and an external element. And in our classes, we're also exploring this idea through the body, through movement. What does the body do? What is the body's experience? And of course, what is the experience of the synthesis of the thoughts in our head that may take in the form of words as well as the sensations? So all of these things are kind of mixed together. Before I go, I also want to say there is a Facebook group which is also called Expanding Your World, and you can join that Facebook group, and a lot of the discussions that are happening in the class on Wednesdays are also happening in the Facebook group. So I'll include links for the class, for the Facebook group below. Would love to hear your thoughts on this idea of embodied dialogue. Maybe you're someone who practices circling or Diaologos, and this is something that is my version of making a connection to what I already do to some of those practices. So it is not the same, but it is not entirely, it's not like I'm trying to create something entirely new. I'm definitely building on what I've been learning through those relational practices. Perhaps I'll make some more videos after this, get a little more active on YouTube again, but this felt important to put out there, especially if you've been checking out this channel and kind of wondering where I went. That's some of what I've been diving into recently. I'm very excited about it, and I would love to have you come and join in and be part of this embodied dialogue. So thanks for listening.